boxing ring. So here's what's going to happen now. Why don't you all stand up and take a little stretch? Because we got about 12 more minutes, and then we're going to let you ask questions and make comments. Why don't you just stretch, because you've been sitting for a while. And I'll keep talking if you don't mind. One of our dreams with Open Communities is that we're going to want to start a story gathering project, so we start to hear each other's stories. And so I started this idea of listening to some of our neighbors' stories and sharing sometimes we don't even know who we live next door to, right? We don't know their stories. So what I'm going to do tonight, this is so hot off the presses, I mean literally editing it last night before I went to work this morning. So I'm going to be telling these stories to you because they're so brand new. But just as simple as sitting down with a couple neighbors and finding out their stories. So you up for a couple short little stories?
All right,
Okay. So when you find your seat, get some water. Our dream is that we might have high school students teach them how to gather the elder stories, go into other neighborhoods and gather stories, professional storytellers gathering, sometimes telling people stories, sometimes training the people to tell their own stories. But the idea being that neighbors start listening, really having avenues to hear one another's stories. Like you just met Arif as one of your neighbors and heard his story, how we can work with each other to do that. So I would like to introduce, and I'll introduce you to him because he's here, a man that I met that somebody said, you should meet my neighbor. So here's a story of William Howard. William Howard of Northbrook, who is 84 years old, describes the line of neighbors who showed up at his hospital bed last November as the parade. The day after I broke my hip, he told me, the parade started up. Just a line of neighbors at the hospital all day long, wondering how they could help. I was sitting in William's modest Northbrook home, interviewing him for this evening of stories. William started right in. He told me that before he moved to Northbrook, he had lived on Chicago's South Side. Had lived on the South Side all his life. But one day in 1995, when William came home and found graffiti painted on the garage behind the 3 flat he owned, he said, that's it, and moved to Northbrook. He moved in with his partner, Owen, a Northbrook native. They had met 23 years before on a London theater tour. That London vacation started a joint 38-year cultural exploration of Chicago area theaters, Steppenwolf, Northlight, Shakespeare Theater, and William's favorite, the Lyric Opera. Sitting on William's couch with a bright bay window behind me, I asked William if he had any qualms about moving into the predominantly white neighborhood or finding acceptance for this interracial partnership, and he answered right away, no. He explained that he had been the only black person working in this downtown Chicago 8th-floor office building at Washington and Wacker Drive in the 1950s, way before desegregation. For example, a co-worker at William's downtown print shop complained about William using the water fountain. And William's boss fired that man, not William. So for a man who has come to expect the best in people, the move to the predominantly white Northbrook area in the 1990s didn't faze him. I don't think that much about race, I think about the people I meet, he said. I didn't think about it when I met Owen, I didn't do it when I decided to move to Northbrook. I looked for nice people, and that's what I found here. Still in all, one could find it a generous stance towards life for a man whose ancestors on his father's side had been chased out of Mississippi and then chased out of Oklahoma for the color of their skin. But as he sat across from me smiling, I could see this was a man who was grounded in the present and his deep cultural values to look for the good in life. Not an exception, but one of thousands upon thousands of people who knew what it meant to survive. He told me flat out, I don't like to talk about the hard times, the lynchings and all that went on in the past is like the Holocaust for African Americans. We don't dwell on all the difficult things that happened. But William was more than willing to tell me about his travels. William had gotten his travel bug inadvertently in 1972 when he was 47 years old and his grandmother died. At the cemetery, his grandmother's son, William's Uncle John, came down with a horrible cold that turned into pneumonia. William's uncle died the very next week. William kept dreaming repeatedly about his grandmother and his uncle. Night after night, they showed up in his dreams. He told his brother, "I feel like Grandma wants me too." His brother told him to take a vacation, to get his mind off things. So William went to London on a theater tour. That's when he discovered that travel must be in his DNA, for he has, to date, taken 17 trips to Europe, as well as traveled to Morocco and Japan. And many of those trips were gourmet cooking and eating tours, which may explain why William is known for the dishes he brings to the Ferndale Avenue holiday celebrations and summer block parties each year. On that block, William can tell you everyone who's lived there, everyone who lived before the present neighbors, what all their kids studied in school, where they work now, and even the cute things they said when they were young. So he was only 5 years old. He told me about a neighbor boy who was now a doctor, and he told me that his mommy had bought a gorilla. I said, "A gorilla? What do you mean your mom bought a gorilla?" Come to find out, my neighbor had bought a Weber Gorilla, which to a 5-year-old sounded like gorilla. It was the cutest thing, William said. William can also tell you which neighbors installed a railing for him after his fall, which ones pick him up for Northbrook Library movies on Wednesday and the music series on Sundays, who drives him to Sunset Foods, all the neighbors with whom he regularly goes to dinner, who will take care of your pets and plants when you're gone, and who can fix anything around the house, or if they can't, who you should call. Owen was handy in his own way, William remembered. He took a whole year building a grandfather clock. Neighbors came regularly to see his progress, and finally, when it was done, several neighbors came to move it from the workbench downstairs up to the living room. When Owen fell in the driveway 3 years earlier, the same neighbors were there to help Owen and William. The fall had been painful for Owen, but everyone was truly caught off guard when 3 days later, Owen unexpectedly died of a heart attack. His sudden loss was only mitigated by an astonishing surprise at the next block party. That next summer, the neighbors bought a red maple tree, Owen's favorite, and planted it in William's and Owen's front lawn during the block party. They invited Owen's family and scattered Owen's ashes beneath the tree. "The whole block was in my front yard," William told me. He pointed out the window and gave a slight shiver. "It just gives me the chills to think of that service and look out at that tree each day, that the neighbors would do that for us." I had spent an hour with William. It was just before 3 in the afternoon. The time had flown by. I held photographs in my lap that he had taken off the refrigerator to show me. He and his brother in the Army, Owen and he on a cruise, his family, 5 sisters and all their kids at a family reunion, and many, many photographs taken at block parties. I looked at the man whose family had been chased out of whole states for the color of their skin, and smiled to think he had truly found a home. Northbrook was a happy place for him. "There's so much help and acceptance here," he mused as the grandfather clock struck the top of the hour. "You don't even have to ask." William, would you stand up? I want to say William got here without a cane today. He came on his own 2 feet. He's just preparing so wonderfully. Part of the thing we're wanting to do in these stories is tell all the truth, I mean the good, bad, and ugly and everything, but one of the things is to break the stereotype of North Shore, like we're all rich, we're all stepping out of our BMWs with our diamond rings and our minks on, we're all snobs and don't care about each other, and to break the stereotypes of who's living here and how neighbors take care of each other is one of the important stories. I have a couple pictures here of block parties. Let's go on ahead. A reviewer, darling. Say so. You go. There's one of the block parties. It's Owen and yep, Owen with William. And there's a bunch of the guys. And there is Debbie De Palma, who's the neighbor who introduced me, her daughter Sophia. Right? It's a little UN now, right? The family next door is Taiwanese who built the railing after his fall, and you know, he can tell you about every single neighbor, which I love. There's more of the folks. All right. Oh, that's it. Okay. Thank you so much, Will.